Hello everyone. This is me, Debosmita Sarkar. Today we are going to talk about Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle, KSTJDL, was born on 22nd May 1859 to 7th July 1930. He was a British writer and a medical doctor. He created the character Sherlock Holmes in 1887 for A Study in Scarlet, the first of four novels and 56 short stories about Holmes and Dr. Watson. The Sherlock Holmes stories are generally considered milestone in the field of crime fiction. Doyle is a prolific writer. Other than her home story, his works include fantasy and science fiction, stories about Professor Challenger, and humorous stories about the Napoleonic soldier Brigadier General, as well as plays, romances, poetry, non-fiction, and historical novels. One of Doyle's early short stories, J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement in 1884, helped to popularize the mystery of the Mary Celeste. This is the picture of Arthur Conan Doyle. Information about Sherlock Holmes. This is the short picture of the which contains the information about Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is a fictional detective of the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, whose first appeared in publication in 1887. He was devised by British author and physician Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, a brilliant London-based detective. Holmes is famous for his prowess at using logic and astute observation to solve cases. He is perhaps the most famous fictional detective and indeed one of the best known and most universally recognizable literary characters. Early life of Sherlock Holmes. Details of Sherlock Holmes' life in Conan Doyle stories are scarce and often vague. Nevertheless, mentions of his early life and extended family paint a loose biographical picture of the detective. A statement of Holmes' age in his last book places his year of birth at 1854. The story, set in August 1914, describes him as 60 years of age. His parents are not mentioned, although Holmes mentioned that his ancestors were country squires. In the Adventure of the Greek Interpreter, he claims that his grandmother was sister to the French artist Vernet, without clarifying whether this was Claude Joseph Curl or Horace Vernet. Holmes' brother, Mycroft, 7 years his senior, is a government official. Mycroft has a unique civil service position as a kind of human database for all aspects of government policy. Sherlock describes his brother as the more intelligent of the two, but notes that Mycroft lacks any interest in physical investigation, preferring to spend his time at the Diogenes Club. Holmes said that he first developed his methods of deduction as an undergraduate. His earliest cases, which he persuaded as an amateur, came from fellow university students. A meeting with the classmates further led him to adopt detection as a profession. Habits and personality. Watson describes Holmes as bohemian in habits and lifestyles. Although Holmes is described in the Hound of Baskervilles as having a cat-like love of personal cleanliness, Watson also describes Holmes as an eccentric with no regard for contemporary standards of tidiness or good order. He alternates between days or weeks of listless lassitude and similar periods of intense engagement with a challenging case or with his hobby, experimental chemistry, extreme exactness and astuteness, or a poetic and contemplative mood, outbursts of passionate energy followed by reactions of lethargy. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. In almost all the stories, Holmes is assisted by the practical Watson, who is not only a friend but also his chronicler, his Boswell. Most of Holmes' stories are told as narratives by Watson of the detective's solution to crimes brought to his attention by clients. Holmes sometimes criticizes Watson for his writings, usually because he relates them as exciting stories rather than as objective and detailed reports focusing on what Holmes regards as the pure science of his craft. Retirement. In his last bow, the reader is told that Holmes has retired to a small farm on the Sussex Downs and take up beekeeping as his primary occupation. The move is not dated precisely but can be presumed to be no later than 1904 since it is referred to retrospectively in The Adventure of the Second Stain, first published that year. The story features Holmes and Watson coming out of retirement to aid the British war effort. Only one other adventure, the adventure of the Lion's Mane, takes place during the detective's retirement. Knowledge and skills. Shortly after meeting Holmes in the first story, a study in Scarlet generally assumed to be 1881, though the exact date is not given, Watson assesses the detective's abilities. Knowledge of literature, knowledge of philosophy, knowledge of astronomy, knowledge of politics, knowledge of botany, variable, well up in belladonna, opium, and poisons generally, knows nothing of practical gardening. Knowledge of geology, practical but limited, tells at a glance different salts from each other. After Vox has shown me splashes upon his trousers and told me by their color and consistency in what part of London had received them. Knowledge of chemistry, knowledge of anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. Knowledge of sensational literature, immense. He appears to know every detail of every horror perpetrated in the century. Plays the violin well, is an expert single stick player, boxer and swordsman, has a good practical knowledge of British law. Subsequent stories reveal that Watson's early assessment was incomplete in places and inaccurate in others due to the passage of time in nothing else. Despite Holmes' supposed ignorance of politics in A Scandal of Bohemia, he immediately recognizes the true identity of the disguised Count von Graham. At the end of a study in Scarlet, Holmes demonstrates a knowledge of Latin. The detective cites Hafiz Kiosk as well as a letter from Gustave Flaubert to George Sand in the original French. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, the detective recognizes works by Godfrey Naylor and Joshua Reynolds. Watson won't allow that I know anything of art, but that is mere jealousy since our views upon the subjects differ. In The Adventure of the Bruce Spotting on Plants, Watson says that Holmes lost himself in a monograph which he had undertaken upon the polyphonic mollets of lassos, considered the last word on the subject. Use of drugs. Holmes occasionally uses addictive drugs, especially in the absence of stimulating cases. He sometimes uses morphine and sometimes cocaine, the latter of which he injects in a 7% solution. Both drugs were legal in 19th century England. As a physician, Watson strongly disapproves of his friend's cocaine habit, describing it as the detective's only vice and concerned about its effect on Holmes' mental health and intellect. In The Adventure of the Missing Three-Quarter, Watson says that although he was weaned Holmes from drugs, the detective remains an addict whose habit is not dead but merely sleeping. Watson and Holmes both use tobacco, smoking cigarettes, cigars, and pipes. Although his chronicler does not consider Holmes smoking a vice per se, Watson, a physician, does criticize the detective for creating a poisonous atmosphere in their confined quarters. Holmesian deduction. Holmes observes the traits and attitude of his clients and suspects, noting skin marks such as tattoos, contamination such as ink stains or clay on boots, emotional state and physical condition in order to deduce their origins and recent history. The style and state of wear of a person's clothes and personal items are also commonly relied on in the stories. Holmes is seen applying his method to items such as walking sticks, pipes, and hats. For example, a scandal of Bohemia, Holmes infers that Watson had got wet lately and had a most clumsy and careless servant girl. When Watson asks how Holmes knows this, the detective answers. It is simplicity itself. My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the firelight strikes it, the letter is scored by six almost parallel cuts. Obviously, they have been caused by someone who has very carelessly scraped around the edges of the sole in order to remove crusted mud from it. Hence, you see my double deduction that you had been out in wild weather, and that you had a particular malignant boots sleeting specimen of the London slavery. Elementary, my dear Watson. The phrase elementary, my dear Watson has become one of the most quoted and iconic aspects of the character. However, although Holmes often observes that his conclusions are elementary and occasionally calls Watson my dear Watson, the phrase elementary, my dear Watson is never uttered in any of the 60 stories by Conan Doyle. One of the nearest approximation of the phrase appears in The Adventure of the Crookman when Holmes explains a deduction. Excellent, excellent, I cried. Elementary, said he. Adaptation and derived work. The popularity of Sherlock Holmes has meant that many writers, other than author Conan Doyle, have created tales of the detective in a wide variety of different media with varying degrees of fidelity to the original characters, stories, and setting. The first known period pastiche dates from 1893, tilted the late Sherlock Holmes. It was written by Conan Doyle's close friend J.M. Barrie. Adaptations have seen the character taken in radically different directions or placed in different times or even universes. For example, Holmes falls in love and marries in Laurie R. King's Mary Russell series is reanimated after his death to fight future crime in the animated series. Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century and is matched with the setting of H.P. Lovecraft's Tulhu Mythos in Neil Gaiman's A Study in Emerald, which won the 2004 Hugo Award for Best Short Story, and especially influential pastiche, which was Nicholas May's The 7% Solution, and the 1974 New York Times best-selling novel made into the film 1976 of the same name. in which Holmes' cocaine addiction has progressed to the point of endangering his career. It served to popularize the trend of incorporation clearly identified and contemporaneous historical figures such as Oscar Wilde, Aleister Crowley, Sigmund Freud, or Jack the Ripper into Holmesian pastiches, sometimes something Conan Doyle himself never did. Another common pastiche approach is to create a new story fully retelling an otherwise person Conan canonical reference, such as an aside by Conan Doyle mentioning the giant rat of Sumatra, a story for which the world is not yet prepared in the adventure of the Sussex vampire. Copyright issues. The copyright of Conan Doyle's work expired in the United Kingdom and Canada at the end of 1990, was revived in 1996 and expired again at the end of 2000. The author's works are now in public domain in those countries. In the United States, for many years, all works published before 1923 are in the public domain, but as 10 Holmes stories were published after that date, the Conan Doyle's estate mentioned that the Holmes and Watson characters as a whole were still under copyright. On 14th February 2013, Leslie S. Klinger, lawyer and editor of the annotated Sherlock Holmes, filed a declaratory judgment suit against the Conan Doyle estate, asking the court to acknowledge that the characters of Holmes and Watson were public domain in the US. The court ruled in Klinger's favor on 23rd December, and the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed its decision on 16 June 2014. The case was appealed to the US Supreme Court, which declined to hear the case, leaving the appeals court's ruling stand. This resulted in the characters from the home stories, along with all but 10 of the stories themselves, being in the public domain in the US. The stories still under copyright due to the ruling as of that time were those collected in the case book of Sherlock Holmes, other than the adventure of the Mazarine story and problem of Thor Bridge. The remaining 10 home story were to enter the US public domain between 1st January 2019 and 1st January 2020. Since then, four of those 10 have done so. Works which include Sherlock Holmes novels, in A Study in Scarlet, The Sign of the Four, The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Valley of Fear, short story collections. The short stories are originally published in magazines, were later collected in 5 anthologies: The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, His Lost Bow, some later reminiscences of Sherlock Holmes, The Case Book of Sherlock Holmes. So with this we came to the last slide. Thank you. Please do like, share and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to comment in the comment section below. Bye bye. Stay home and stay safe.